corporations have funneled many millions of dollars into the Voice referendum, with the overwhelming majority going toward the yes side of the campaign. The yes side is now significantly better funded than the no side. This is even though the majority of Australians have now decided to vote no in the referendum. Nevertheless, this has triggered quite a bit of consternation from the opposition leader, with Peter Dutton calling out corporations for doing so. But let's be very clear, when we're talking about corporations, what we're really talking about is the CEO and the board of directors. The CEO makes a decision to fund the yes side, but the shareholders might not necessarily agree with this. The employees might not agree with it. It's just that the CEO, the top of the corporation, the CEO and the board of directors specifically want to promote that side of the referendum. It might not be that shareholders want it. It might not be that employees want it. It might not be that customers or suppliers want it. It's just that the CEO wants it. And the CEO is deciding what to do with the company's money, i.e. the CEO is deciding to spend other people's money on funding the yes side of the referendum. And this is actually a little bit curious, because this appears to fly in the face of what CEOs and directors are supposed to do. Under the Corporations Act, officers and directors are under a duty, a legal duty, to act in the best interests of the corporation. The courts generally take this to mean that they need to act in shareholders' best interests, except for example in the case of the company going toward bankruptcy, when they must also consider creditors. Now, to be clear here, acting in employees' interests can also benefit shareholders. For example, compensating employees can ultimately grow the pie for everyone, thereby also benefiting shareholders. If shareholders try to get too greedy, if shareholders and companies try to perhaps mess over their employees, then those employees might work less hard, create less value, and everyone loses. So helping employees is not inherently in conflict with helping shareholders. Similarly, the corporation might go and do things that benefit the environment. For example, a mining company might rehabilitate the environment after they have operated mines there. That will also help them to get future government contracts and will help them to carry favour with the local community. But in any case, the overarching duty is to act in shareholders' best interests. Any other actions are only consistent with the duty to the extent they also benefit shareholders. So this leads us back to the Voice. The Voice funding here, well, does that actually benefit shareholders? Well, if you look at the Voice itself, it would appear that actually harms shareholders. It appears that CEOs are funding a campaign that actually harms shareholders' interests. They're doing things that harm their own employers. They're doing things that potentially harm their own employees. They're doing things that harm their customers or suppliers. The CEOs are using other people's money to fund something that harms those people from whom they're getting the money. So to see this, let's think about how the Voice will operate. Well, the Voice would be empowered to go out and make representations to and engage with and influence various government agencies. These would include agencies such as the RBA, various climate authorities, various environmental authorities. The Voice would be able to influence those agencies. Now, it's often stated that the Voice is simply advisory. But let's be clear here. If you only hear one side of a court case, are you really hearing an impartial, unbiased argument? You're just hearing one side of the case. With the Voice, you are just going to hear one side of the argument. Only one side of the argument gets government funding. Only one side of the argument gets government support. Only one side of the argument gets in front of the agency. The other side of the argument, the person who might rebut the Voice, well, they're nowhere to be found because they don't get the funding, they don't get the access. The Voice gets a special access and funding to go out and make representations to these agencies, therefore it gets a special influence over those agencies. So you end up with this Voice body that has no special expertise in a particular area such as monetary policy, going out and trying to influence the RBA. And you aren't hearing the contrary arguments against what the Voice is representing. Hence why you end up with this slightly underqualified body influencing these agencies. These agencies are then implicitly coerced into following along with the Voice. Because if they disagree with the Voice, well then the Voice body can argue that that agency has simply failed to consider their representations. They can litigate over that under standard practices of administrative law. That is, the Voice could litigate if they just allege that the agency has ignored what they've said. And as a result, you could stymie agencies' decision-making. And the mere threat of that litigation can coerce agencies into following along with the Voice, even if they don't think it is necessarily the best thing to do. So in essence, this Voice now has significant funding to make politically biased representations, you don't hear the counter-argument, and the agency is coerced implicitly into following what the Voice is saying. Therefore, the Voice, in essence, does have influence and it does have power. And anyone who says otherwise is just gaslighting. Now, the way in which the Voice might influence things is clearly going to be to benefit the Voice. It won't be to benefit BHP, it won't be to benefit Rio Tinto, it won't be to benefit the corporations. It will be to benefit the Voice. It will be to benefit themselves. It won't benefit the corporation that is ultimately funding the Yes campaign. The Yes campaign is in essence here funding a body that is then going to act against it when it gets into power. And this means these corporations, or in particular the CEOs, are funding something that actively undermines their own shareholders' best interests. They're funding something that will undermine their own best interests. The CEOs are not acting in shareholders' best interests by funding the Yes campaign. And this ultimately means they appear to be in clear conflict with Section 181 of the Corporations Act. And this is not just some hypothetical. We need only look at what's happened in Western Australia, where myriad farmers have been caught up in cultural heritage-related laws, whereby they need to seek approval from bureaucrats in order to do things such as plant trees and dig posts to put up fences. This is not just some hypothetical situation where the voice might adversely affect corporations. It's very real, and this type of thing is playing out in Western Australia. And it's better to avoid this at the source. It's best to avoid this by not having the voice in place at all. Now, it's sometimes argued that you need to support the voice so you're not called quote-unquote racist. But the simple fact of the matter is, the very premise of the voice is itself racist. You are providing a special funding, access, and therefore power to one group of people on the basis of race. That is privilege on the basis of race, and that is textbook racism. It is not clear to me how the voice is anything other than racist, and therefore arguing against it is in fact arguing against racism. It's gaslighting in the extreme to call the No campaign racist, because the Yes campaign is the one that appears to actually be racist in effect, given that the voice is in fact effectively racist. And therefore the No campaign is in fact the one that is consistent with human rights ideas. The No campaign is in fact the one that is resisting racism, not promoting it. And arguing otherwise is simply gaslighting. It's, for example, trying to tell someone that a dog is a cat, and then coercing them and punishing them if they disagree. It's an exercise in Orwellian doublespeak. And interestingly enough, the government is trying to silence anyone who calls them out for this. If we just look at the ACMA bill, well, they're effectively trying to police quote-unquote misinformation. But what is misinformation? Well, misinformation is whatever the government tells you it is. Misinformation is what the government disagrees with. Misinformation is the contrary argument. And now would now just deem misinformation to be the No campaign. They would just deem misinformation to be anything that disagrees with the government. And that ACMA bill is clearly an attack on freedom of speech. We should, of course, consider employees, customers, and suppliers. After all, if you're funding something that your employees believe in, well, that can encourage employee morale. It can make those employees feel better about working at that organization. It could perhaps cause them to work a little bit harder, or to be happier on the job, creating more value for shareholders. However, here, the majority of Australians intend to vote no in the referendum. It's not clear that funding the Yes campaign would encourage employee morale. After all, if your employees intend to vote no, but you're funding the Yes campaign, there would be a value disalignment. Your employees would prefer you did not fund that Yes campaign because they intend to vote no, i.e. this funding does not improve employee morale. It would therefore not improve productivity. It would not improve the corporation at all. At best, this funding appears to be a waste of money. But in reality, it's worse than that. It's not just a waste of money, it actively destroys corporate value. And these CEOs are using shareholders' own money to destroy shareholder wealth. That is, CEOs are harming their own employers. This appears to be in direct violation of their directors' duties in many cases, and it would appear that this is a very ill-advised decision.